At the end of the novel, the quote, hand of dog,
the hand of dog,
the hand of the hand of Kojack. At the end of the, maybe it's a big paw, a big fucking god paw comes down, and Kojack's like, fuck you.
Genuinely, like, growing up religious, I always thought it was so interesting. This is like a child's thoughts too, so you have to bear with me, but like dog and God being like the inverse of each other, like there's something there,
that
right?
Means
like dogs
something.
are very associated with God.
Yeah, man, I'm with you. Welcome, friends, to episode 170 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
And this week we discuss the final third of Stephen King's 1978 novel, The Stand. All right, James, I am feeling good this week. I am happy. I am back in my comforting world of a post-apocalyptic America with Stephen King and away from the scary TV show that hurt me in some ways. I mean, I'm interested to get back to it, but we're back in Bookland, and I am proud to report that things in Las Vegas are not nearly as bad as I thought they were. I was very glad to see that the depiction of Las Vegas and under Randall Flagg in the TV show bears almost no resemblance to what we got in the book.
Yeah, we've been drawing the comparisons to the Lord of the Rings this entire coverage, which I had no idea about. You brought that up in our first episode, and it's just continued. There's references galore just constantly in the text, even for where Stephen King is doing that. And I couldn't help but think of Vegas as like Saruman's hub, like
Mordor?
I think it's Isengard, right? Where Isengard is where he's like amassing his armies and stuff, the Uruk-hai and everything. I think maybe I'm wrong, and that's embarrassing if so. But
isn't that Saruman? Isn't Isengard Saruman?
That's what I said, right? Saruman?
Oh, okay, got you. I think it's Sauron. It doesn't help that their names are basically identical.
Yeah. So yeah, that Vegas reminded me of that sort of, like, it was more serious, seemed like more orchestrated and planned, and less like a teenager's fever dream. But I did like things in the show. You know, we talked about it last week, and
we're not going to talk about the show too much, but I had to make this comparison because in the last episode, if you listened to it, I openly questioned. I was like, is this what happens in the book? I don't remember. Maybe it does. There's been a lot of sex, so maybe it's just fucking wild sex parties when they get to Las Vegas. But what's funny is that's kind of what I think like the reader would expect, and I think what Stephen King does is subvert that and give you something different. And instead he goes the Nazi Germany route, which is what he references a few times, and he says everything is very orderly, everything works, everything is very functional. There's not a lot of like extra, I don't know, excess at all in this society. In fact, that's the appeal of it. And a lot of good people, otherwise good people, are there because they like the order and they like the structure. It's not a bunch of like sex deviant, like whatever. I mean, not my words, but like that's what I think a lot of people would look at what's going on in the Las Vegas in the show and call it that. So it's not that. It's just, I don't know. It's like just different people, but they're just people.
Randall Flagg goes as far as to like threaten people who take drugs, and
drugs are like illegal, like punishable by death.
Right. Which did not seem to be the case. I mean, I guess we didn't see any specific drug use that I can think of in the show, but I think it's implied that people are intoxicated in certain ways. But
for sure. There's like light drinking, and that's all that is allowed. It seems like, but not drunkenness.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's just a very different Las Vegas, but that's just one piece of it, honestly. Like, coming back to the book after watching the 5 episodes of the show, it's just nice. Like, I like Stephen King's writing style. He has so much excess in his books, in the sense that, like, he gives you so many details you don't need, but it's such a stylistic thing that works so well for his fiction. And then because he writes that way, you get so many extra things that like many other authors don't give you. He's got these like excellent eye for just random ass little details, and the inner lives of people and his characters that feels incredibly personal. And you get almost like a voyeuristic feeling watching them go about their lives, and every, minute detail, whether they're, people using the bathroom or having sex or, thinking about what they're going to do today, watching TV, whatever it is. Like, they do mundane shit, they do interesting shit, they do like gross shit. It feels very personal. Mm-hmm. And he just, when he takes that and he goes into all these different minds, and then some of them he'll give you that perspective on like disturbed minds, and it just cuts so deep, and it's so interesting to me. And it's just something that no Stephen King adaptation can really do, because it's a very unique 2 books thing.
It's also extremely natural feeling. Like, they don't feel like contrived details. It doesn't feel like a writer trying to add detail to a novel. It feels like real life. You know what I mean? It doesn't feel contrived.
Which, of course, is a magic trick that he's performing incredibly well.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, because those are all choices that you writers have to make. But yeah, it doesn't feel like he's like, I'm going to now include this one random detail. Like, it just works. I don't know. The choices, he makes so many pop culture references. That's something I'm noticing. Like, he references so many books, so many movies, songs, whatever it is, all straight out of the real world. And I'm always struck by like how well read and like, you know what I mean? Like, he just knows all these different characters have different movies they've seen once or different books they've read once, and he'll reference shit that we've covered on this podcast, and it always delights me whenever that happens.
Yeah. And again, it feels natural. It doesn't feel like he's making a reference for the sake of making a reference. He's making a reference because it in some way pertains to this story. Like, it'll be a commentary on the story.
If you know what he's talking about, you can kind of get a little bit of an insight into what's going on. It's like a very deliberate reference.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah, you're right. It's not just throwaway.
It's not just whatever it was, Skyscraper, or what was the movie? And there's like a
it's not
Blu-ray.
Just referencing The Rock for no reason. It's funny. As much as that did get a laugh out of me. Definitely much less integrated. Like, he references Lord of the Rings several times in this book, and I think it's very, you can learn a lot from paying attention to those messages. Yeah, so, I mean, I figure for this episode, we're going to go down the line and talk about what happens with characters, because that's what we've been doing for this coverage. But I'm going to start with some characters who don't last very long, and that's Judge Ferris and then Dana Jurgens. So, Judge Ferris, the judge attempts to infiltrate Las Vegas from the north, but he is intercepted by Flagg's sentries in Idaho. Judge is killed by several shots to the head. However, the judge's death is a direct violation of Flagg's orders and is a sign that Flagg's power is fallible. The sentries had been under strict orders to not, quote, mark his head, so that the head could be delivered as a message to the free zone. And the narrative suggests that Flagg brutally kills the surviving sentry, Bobby Terry, for disfiguring the judge's face and hampering his plan. Yeah, okay, so yeah, we're following the judge. He's driving through Oregon, which I thought was fun because I'm currently in Oregon and live in Portland. And then, the shootout with Bobby Terry, and it's Bobby Terry shoots his like friend, his patrolman, and it's messy and fucked up, and Bobby Terry, doesn't work out well for him. Yeah,
there's this I remember talking about it way back in our first project coverage. That was the first thing we ever covered, and it was Stephen King. In this story, the little trickle of like a guiding hand of fate kept showing up. And I feel like with this shootout situation, like, we even got the perspective of this scout or whatever, that he was thinking like, I can't, damage his face. I need to make sure he comes back. But then he like makes a mistake, and it seems like it was just like fated to have happened like this. Mm-hmm. And then, I don't know if it was like a Randall influence, which I doubt, because he, that's not what he wanted, but maybe it was the influence of somebody else to make it happen this specific way, so that this person would suffer. I'm not really sure. It just seems,
there's a reference to a hand of God later, so I think you're not completely reading into it to see some fate here or there. You're right, and that does one thing that stood out for me from the judge's sort of, final moments is right before that, when he's in the hotel and the crow comes. And he starts having these thoughts about, like, what if Randall is, like, embodying that crow and looking at me right now? And then he starts referencing the Raven, like Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, and quoting that, and just, I don't know, it was cool. And then, trying to shoot at it and, like, flying away. And, like, that even though he's, like, having this, fantasy about it, you're like, that probably is what's happening. Right. So he's like tapping into something here.
Well, he's like staring at the crow, and the crow has like rings of red around its eyes or something. So you're like, okay, so like Randall's all black scary animals, I guess, like wolves.
And then he thinks like, if I shoot it right now, will it trap him inside the body of the crow and all that stuff? Funny. And like, I don't know, I felt like there was something to it. It's like maybe it would have if it had worked.
Well, we do come to find out that like once we get further into the Randall Flagg stuff, like, to reference Lord of the Rings again, there's this sort of eye power that he has.
Yep.
That he's like projecting himself into things.
Yeah, he's projecting his eye around. You can see many, many things. It's true. I think it's directly influenced by it. Okay, if you're ready, let's go to Dana.
Yeah.
So in Las Vegas, Juergens works with a streetlight repair crew and sleeps with Lloyd Henry as part of her ploy to obtain information. While working with the crew, she observes Tom Cullen on a passing truck. Flagg, aware of her identity through telepathy, summons her to his office and attempts to make her reveal the third spy, whose mind he is unable to penetrate. To protect Cullen and save herself from torture at the hand of Flagg, Juergens commits suicide by ramming her head through a plate glass window and turning so that the broken edges slice open her jugular vein. This act of free will indicates the beginning of Flagg's downfall, as while he foresaw her attempt to assassinate him and consequently thwarted the attempt, he did not predict her suicide attempt and could therefore not prevent her death. Juergens' body is desecrated by Flagg and later burned outside of Las Vegas. So, I'm curious to know what you thought of this version of Dana's final moments. Also, maybe before we get to the final moments, her and Lloyd, we see Lloyd here, and was I right in that this version of Lloyd is different too from the show?
Yeah, different, more like we've talked about, more intimidating. I think he's got more going on. He is sort of, there are things from that the show took and sort of exacerbated, made like larger in the character, I guess, bigger swings. But yeah, I actually felt like all this stuff, because we the show kind of jumped ahead of where we were in the book. Where we had gotten, and so I kind of assumed that a lot of that stuff was show invention, and I kept being surprised that like, oh shit, this is like a Stephen King thing, like Dana sleeping with Lloyd, her killing herself,
which she doesn't actually do in the show. It gets interrupted, but yeah, she does in the book for sure. Although it's interesting the way she sort of situates it. She compares herself to what is it, Mata Hari? Like a woman who was an assassin who would sleep with people and then kill them, as far as my understanding of it is. So it's like more of her choice. Like she's deliberately doing it to get close, whereas in the show it was definitely set up differently.
Yeah, I mean, it still kind of felt like she knew what she was doing. Like she knew that she was just trying to control him and that kind of thing. Yeah. But yeah, I agreed. It was because the internal thoughts were getting more of that like sort of cunning side of it, where she's like planning all this and using it to her advantage.
But what about her and Randall? What'd you think of that conversation?
Oh, interesting stuff. It played similarly, but again, I think it's just like something about the imagination of Randall and starting to see some of his powers. We see him levitate in the show. We see him like she strikes a blow with him in this fight, right? In the book as well. Like she's able to like pull a knife out or something.
She pulls a knife out, but he turns it into a banana.
That's what it is, yeah. Which sounds funnier than it is in the book, right? Like just saying that out loud sounds funny, but it worked in the moment. Like having
it works, but I actually like how they did it in the show better. I liked him actually getting stabbed. I just thought that was cooler. But for the most part, I thought this version is a little more interesting. One thing I liked about it was all the stories we'd heard about Randall being able to drive people mad by just like looking into their eyes, and the different stories. And it's normally like stuff she'd heard, here or there. And then he kind of attempts to like brainwash her, and he's promising her, oh yeah, you're gonna be allowed to leave. And he calls up Lloyd and he tells him to bring around a bike for her. And she has to like shake it off and realize that that's what's happening. So you can see his influence more here. And then I really like the detail that was omitted from the show of him raging and kicking her body around after she died. And maybe that would have been too dark, I don't know. But like it shows, just like that summary you read, it kind of shows that he's losing it, right? Like it's
Yeah.
starting to come apart a little bit for
And
him.
I did that. That's one thing I wanted to ask you. Like, do you feel like you have a strong handle on what exactly? Because with Pennywise, we got in it, we kind of got to know that like the kids' fear of him was like feeding his powers. What do you think, Randall here? Like what does that mean for him? Like, why is he starting to lose it even with the Dana stuff?
Yeah, I do have theories about that. I think I'm going to save it for when we get, because I have a section where we're going to talk about Randall Flagg in particular.
Okay.
And I'll save it for there because I think more than the first time I read this book, I have more theories about what's going on with Randall Flagg, like what he represents in the narrative, and also, like what kind of creature I guess he might be.
Yeah.
So I think next, let's talk about Harold Lauder, who is, one of our major characters from book 2. Like a lot happens with him, setting up the bomb and leaving. And we only kind of get like one real section of Harold, one that's like significant portion in book 3. So let's talk about what happens with him. Harold Lauder, after detonating the bomb, which kills 7 people, Lauder and Cross flee towards Las Vegas. Lauder wrecks his motorcycle and breaks his leg after slipping on an oil slick. It's implied that Flagg, mistrustful of Lauder for being, quote, too full of thoughts, arranged the accident. Lauder survives, though badly injured, and attempts to shoot Cross, who abandons him. Realizing that he is dying, Lauder writes a note in which he takes responsibility for his actions and expresses remorse, which he signs Hawk, as a way of accepting the best version of himself that existed briefly in Boulder. Lauder then commits suicide by shooting himself in the head. His body is later found by Redman's traveling group, and they do not bury his corpse, choosing to leave it intact beyond Stu's simple gesture of gently removing the pistol from Harold's mouth and tossing it aside. To Redman's surprise, he finds himself wanting to avenge Lauder's death along with the bombing victims when he finally encounters Flagg. What did you think of the way this character ends up? Because I think it's safe to say that this is not what you would usually expect for this kind of character, right? Like this is a different kind of ending.
Absolutely. It's completely shocked that, and I think King does something smart here, and I think he has done this many times in the many books that we've read on the podcast. He puts in so much legwork to set this character up to really. Oh,
because he breaks his leg. I get you.
Haha. But
sorry.
So like he puts in so much legwork to make you understand this character, understand their motives, understand why they're doing these things, why they're dangerous, and where you think that they'll be going, like setting up a clear path of what you would expect them to do, and then pulling the rug out from under you by having something like this happen. And it's shocking and subverting. I think subverting expectations is I think it's one of the best things you can do in storytelling, right? And I think there will be people who react strongly to subverting their expectations. Some people want their expectations to be met.
And just subverting expectations is not a replacement for creating a good narrative, as we learned from the final season of Game of Thrones. Anyway.
No, but what I mean, satisfyingly, please make it satisfying. But subverting
still
expectations
has to be satisfying.
I mean, like I said, he did the legwork. He did the legwork to set this character up, and it makes sense for him to die here in the grand scheme of things, but at the same time you definitely didn't see it coming.
Yeah. Did you feel like you were you hoping, or did you expect to get some sort of justice, and did you feel like that was taken? Like
yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I felt like he was a character who had his comeuppance on the way. Like he was gonna. I thought that everyone would get revenge, especially for the fact that like Nick died because of this.
But instead, it's just kind of like cosmic, right? Although it is sort of caused by Randall Flagg, so it's really Harold's own doing in that sense.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, but like you say, it is like one of these random acts, these random things that can happen, and it plays to like the randomness of the universe, where it's just like sometimes justice isn't served.
Well, and he loves the way he sets it up is so smart too, because when you first get to Harold's chapter, he's already got the broken leg. And he's like laying there like, I'm going to die. And you're like, wait, what happened? Which is always a fun.
Yeah, it's like the words, the thoughts of a dying man or something. And you're like, holy shit, Harold's dying?
Yeah. And then he goes back and explains how he got here. And, as someone who suffered, pretty brutal leg injuries, reading about brutal leg injuries is definitely harrowing. And when we get several of them into this book.
Well, I think that the mirror between Harold and Stu getting leg injuries is like not lost on me either. It's like, clearly there's a lot going on with Stu.
Well, and we haven't got to Stu yet, but like his leg injury ends up saving him, whereas Harold's leg injury is his downfall.
Right, and then you also have the Stu is the group that finds him. Stu's there, and Stu's the only one who interacts with Harold, and like, you know, it does show some like piece of mercy in his eyes, and after someone killed their friend Nick,
kind of feels bad for him, seems like. And you know, I think it's also really smartly done on the level of creating the expectation that Stu's gonna die. We haven't got there yet, but like, you have just seen a character die from a vicious leg wound, and then when Stu gets a vicious leg wound, you're like, well, there goes Stu Redman. I guess he's going to die. And like, King leans into it, and he does that on purpose. I think he directly is setting the expectation of like, we just saw it did not go well for this other character. So when it happens to Stu, you're primed for it to be a death sentence.
Yeah. I mean, in hindsight, and we're going to get to Stu in a little bit, but in hindsight, the idea that like Mother Abigail set up that somebody's going to fall on their way to this mission, like I should have known at least, but I didn't, that like that would lead to something unexpected. Again, subverting expectations where I'm like, oh, someone falls. The idea of that is someone dies on their way to the trip, doesn't make it, but someone falls in a different way. Yeah.
Which it's just smartly done. Great plotting on King's part here. Let's talk a little bit about Nadine, because she is sort of Harold's, partner here. Cross travels west with Lauder. When Lauder's motorcycle crashes, she implies that it was her intention for Lauder to die in a motorcycle accident instead of being killed by Flagg upon their arrival in Las Vegas. Lauder fires his pistol at Cross and nearly hits her, suggesting that Cross may unconsciously prefer death to the dark consummation waiting for her in Las Vegas. Okay, this is some interesting editorializing by the summary. And also revealing limitations to Flagg's power. Yes, definitely that. Cross continues on towards Las Vegas until Flagg appears to her in the desert. Flagg reveals his true nature to Cross by raping her, an experience that is so horrific to Cross, despite causing her immense pleasure, that she falls into catatonia. Flagg takes Cross with him to Las Vegas, and the pair reside in the penthouse suite of the MGM Grand Hotel complex. Cross's pregnancy is announced shortly after their arrival in Las Vegas. Cross eventually recovers sufficiently to taunt Flagg about his inevitable failure until, in his rage, Flagg throws Cross off the penthouse sun deck and she is killed in the fall. Cross smiles as she falls, and afterward Flagg observes that she had taunted him with the hopes that he would kill her.
Another character who meets a weird, unexpected end. But
yeah,
I mean, jumping back to the stuff with Harold, her realizing the limitations of his power is also us, the reader, realizing the limitations of his power. He can see all things, but it seems like
he can't control
to an extent.
Right? He can't make a bullet not fire at somebody.
Yeah, and then to move into him raping her, which was super, I don't know, not as consensual as I thought. I thought like this whole time that she was like, it was leading up to her sort of accepting her role as what the story has been setting up and stuff.
Yeah.
And then it was just like very, I don't know, graphic. And
yeah, it was, and it's uncomfortable and, incredibly triggering for people. And, it's a rape scene, and like those are incredibly controversial, right? Like, and we're two white guys, who are not people who are going to be like, I don't know, most affected by this, maybe. So it's tough for me to say that it didn't bother me, but like ultimately, I thought the scene worked well for what it was, and the sense that it was someone having sex with like a Lovecraftian like entity that is driving you mad. I thought it was really effectively written and scary, and one of Randall Flagg's most terrifying moments in the book, I think, is this sequence.
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely uncomfortable, and it's meant to be. And yeah, like I just, from my own perspective, I was like, "Ooh, this is wild. This is a crazy scene." And King does this all the time, and power to him, I guess, for I don't know, wanting to take the challenge on. But like these subjects are so difficult to write about. Yeah. And to do it like this is like, I don't know.
And I'm sure he's lost, not to put it in like a callous way, but I'm sure he's lost many, many readers over the years, but gained others. So it's worked out for him, but it's not to say that, every writer should be doing this, because you have to understand you're going to lose people as soon as you touch anything like this.
Yeah. It's one of those, it's very interesting, because it always comes back to the idea of like, what can you write? Because these things do happen. And to kind of turn a blind eye is also another. Yeah.
Is it Stephen King's story to tell? Probably not, but
yeah,
it was also the 70s, so things obviously have changed a lot since then. Which I don't know. I don't want to like completely forgive it. If you're the kind of person who like this is just a non-starter for you, then I think a lot of Stephen King's work is probably going to be a non-starter for you, because he just gets into a lot of areas that are just the darkest, grossest stuff you can write about. Controversial. Yeah.
I mean, the end of It comes to mind with children. Yeah. So.
Well, and other scenes from that book, lots of other scenes from that book. So, and lots of his books have this kind of stuff in it. But as far as that goes, again, I thought it was a very scary scene. I thought that Flagg was terrifying here at one of his most frightening moments. And then
you do get glimpses of the beast, like you're talking about, the creature that he is, and like just it's just savage.
And how little he cares for her is also so tragic. Like he couldn't care less. Like she is nothing to him, and she's given up everything to be to this point. And it's again just like Harold. This self-inflicted wound. Like she gave up the choice to be a good person and to do the right thing, and chose this instead, and it doesn't work out for her.
Right. And then like you said, she just goes basically catatonic. Like she's like,
yeah, kind of, although she's more together than initially thought, because she fools him into killing
at the end,
and killing his own child. And that's where it's really obvious that he has lost it, right? Like he is completely gone, because he has just killed his heir, which like so much was about. I don't know. It's really interesting to see him come apart in this way, and it's like every little bit we get shows another piece of him losing control, losing the things that he's been building, and it seems so self-inflicted too in so many ways, right? It's his own nature. He's starting to believe that he's a god and forget that he like was once a man, and the more that he does that, the more he believes himself infallible, and then when every time he is proven to not be, it's like this huge blow.
I think that for me, we'll get into it a little more, but for me, you're touching on basically the essence of Flagg for what I can derive, like what he's like this idea of power that is fallible, power that like is self-destructive. It's like, and I think that goes to like that. There's a lot that's in this story about that too, like weaponry, war, human race, like what the human race will do to itself. And like I think he kind of represents a lot of that stuff.
Arrogance. Yeah, I think he is sort of a manifestation of a lot of those forces in humanity, are sort of embodied and made into a villain in Randall Flagg. So since we're speaking so much about Randall Flagg, I think let's touch on him. Maybe we'll save the very end of the book, but let's go ahead and talk about him. So Flagg appears to various survivors in their dreams, whereby he provides the dreamers with a choice. Flagg attracts those who are drawn to structure, destruction, and power. He rescues Lloyd Henry from starvation in prison, and Henry, as second in command, establishes a community in Las Vegas, Nevada. Although Flagg possesses the ability to predict the future, along with several demonic powers, as the events of the book's narrative unfold, he begins to gradually lose his power as his plans proceed in an increasingly problematic manner. A weakness of Flagg's that turns out to be completely disastrous for him and his followers is that Flagg cannot read the minds or track the movements of individuals who have mental defects or illness, and some of these individuals end up destroying Flagg's key plans to rule the world. Okay, let's stop there. That's setting up what's going on with Flagg. That's basically what we were just talking about, but yeah, I mean, he is, like, it's interesting how he tries to levitate and, like, he can't go as high. So he is, like, losing some of his power as his followers are starting to leave him. It sounds like he can't see them all, but, like, that's one of the things that Nadine uses to, like, taunt him, is to talk about how they're leaving their posts quietly at night, and you don't see it. And he's losing his power. So he also, I think, is, much like Pennywise, granted power by people. I don't think it's fear, but it's like worship. It's like respect. The more people who respect and worship him and like look up to him and fear him, I think it gives him power. And to have people starting to doubt him and leave, it is literally draining his power.
Yeah, and that it feels pretty biblical, which we've talked about a couple times. Clearly, there's a lot of biblical references going on here and parallels. This idea of something being given power by the masses. You know what I mean? The people believe in something enough, they will act on it. And I think that like we're seeing that with Randall Flagg.
Well, and he, to me, also represents that sort of authoritarian. I think there's a reason why it's compared to Nazi Germany in the sense that he is the strong man that people look to solve their problems. And the power in an authoritarian is granted to them by their followers, right? Like the people who believe in them, who love them, who fear them. That gives them power. And the worst thing you can do to people like that is to, you know, ignore them, don't care what they're doing, you know, don't follow them, don't listen to them. You kind of take the oxygen away from it and it weakens them. So I think in some ways King is making that comparison too.
Yeah.
You know, you ban them from Twitter, that kind of thing.
Hey, you're not wrong. So what do you think about like his abilities being specifically tied to animals? I've been wondering about this, like where
certain animals get a bad rap, man, but I think it's a very old idea, and that's what King's tapping into. Like there's a very ancient fear of like wolves, predators, snakes, crows, black cats, you know, these kind of things that we've proven, you know, since then. A lot of these are just, you know, they're just animals, like much like the shark in Jaws, just an animal. But you know, in this book, he leans into that nature, right?
Yeah, and the situations we find the characters in, you know, if people banded together, you know, early man banded together in order to protect itself from things like wolves. And when you're a single person with a broken leg in the middle of the desert, a wolf is a threat to you again, you know? And so like this idea of these creatures show up a lot of the times when people are alone. We think of like Mother Abigail being attacked by weasels or ferrets or whatever. Like that's a fear that she's held on to, and they come after her when she's alone. And there's a lot of society. I mean, there's a professor of sociology in this story. So like that's a red flag to you to think about what society represents in this story and the loss of society. And like I've talked about sort of the idea of man ultimately, the amazing quote by Glenn earlier that we talked about not last episode, but the one before, in our second book coverage, where he talks about just like, you know, if one person's there, I'll show you a saint, two people, I'll show you love or whatever it was, and three people turns into a society, and then like people start to argue, and that is just natural human nature. And I think that's all wrapped up in this like society being rebuilt from the ground up stuff.
Yeah, this is an envisioning of a second America, kind of rising from the ashes. But we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. Let's back up and talk about our four travelers. Well, five. It's you know, Glenn Bateman, Larry Underwood, Ralph Brentner, and Stu Redman, and our favorite character, Kojack. Kojack comes along, and man, he does a lot more than I remembered. I had forgotten so much about Kojack in this book.
I thought that when we got the Kojack lived happily ever after on the porch, I thought that was the end for Kojack in the story, and I was like so happy to see Kojack come back. This is, like you said in one of our episodes past for the King for the Stand, a lot of like animals aren't always treated great in Stephen King novels, but Kojack, it's a sweet story all the way through.
Yeah, he's great, man, and he is a hero. He saves Stu Redman. You know, he's the best. I mean, great dog. I also wonder if King was like, if I'm writing a post-apocalyptic novel, I gotta have a dog in there, because I feel like that's a staple, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So what about our crew and their journey west? You know, one of the things I thought is interesting, especially this time through, is Mother Abigail commands them to walk. And they do it, even though they talk about, they're like, we could have driven, but we didn't. We decided to walk because she told us to. And they walk like hundreds of miles. Yeah. And Glenn Bateman puts forward the idea, I think it was him, about like why this may be. And he talks about like vision quests and like stripping away all these things out of your life, and then like how that will give you focus. And I feel like that's King basically telling us why this is the case.
Yeah, giving a reason to it.
Yeah. So first off, Stu Redman falls, and we've touched on that already. But yeah, viciously breaks his leg, and I think it's a brilliant move by King to set it up like he's gonna die, and he even throws in the line, "That's the last they ever saw Stu Redman."
Yeah,
and you're like,
that was
"Oh
wild.
shit, he's gonna die." And then, like the very next chapter, they get captured by Randall Flagg, and it's like shit goes down, and you're like, oh, okay, maybe I'm wrong. My expectations were inverted there, but yeah, I think it's a brilliant move. This is a bit of story crafting that I just really enjoy in this book. That sort of misdirect really works.
Yeah, I mean, and I bit the hook, line, and sinker because I was like, okay, that's the last time they see Stu. And it seems like Stu's story's not over, but how many times in this story have we seen someone like Nadine or Harold or, Nick, many other people who felt like they had stories that were unfinished that ended abruptly. So I was, he did the legwork to set it all up. Legwork because, Stu also shatters his leg. But it's all been set up there so that now when this final like sort of bait and switch where he's like, yeah, he's dead. And then we were able to eventually follow his story beyond that. Yeah. And he doesn't make it out in an easy way either. It's not like, oh, once it all goes down, eventually his leg heals and he walks out of the desert. It's not like that. I'll tell you what,
when Kojack stays behind, because that's the other thing is Kojack lives. And so he set this up so you know that. And Kojack leaves him with the others when he leaves initially. And you're like, oh no. But then Kojack returns. And that's when you're like, wait a minute. If Kojack's back, and then Kojack starts bringing him food, and you're like, oh, and wood. He quickly starts to turn that on you, and then you start to think, well, what did that statement mean? And then the dawning realizations happens. It's like, well, I guess Glenn, Larry, and Ralph are like all gonna die.
Yeah.
And sure enough, that's what we get into. They get captured by Flagg's men, brought to like a holding cell, and Glenn gets kind of his own final scene where Randall Flagg comes and meets with him personally with Lloyd at his side, and he just like laughs at him and is like, he's like, I'm so unimpressed by you, and like, what did you take away from that scene?
I mean, you love to see it. It's the meeting of the minds, right? So it's like the characters that are one set up to be a god and one set up to be like an all questioning professor and doesn't believe, doesn't buy into faith necessarily, doesn't do any of this stuff. So then he's met face to face with this god entity. And then, laughs at him, realizes that like it's all a sick joke, and this person like has him captured and everything, but you can't take away his sensibilities. You can't take away what Glenn Bateman thinks just by scaring him and putting him in a cell, or even threatening him and then eventually killing him. You can't control him, and I think again that's another moment where Randall Flagg can't control everything, even as much as he thinks he can.
Well, and we both like Glenn a lot, right? So what did you think of his final moments? Like, were you surprised?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I was definitely, for a second, I thought Lloyd might turn the gun on Randall, and I was like, don't do that. I mean, that's also dumb. Don't shoot Glenn, and don't shoot anybody, honestly. But
shooting Randall probably would have been a decent idea. I mean, it probably would have resulted in his immediate death, but
exactly. Yeah. And then Randall, it's violent, very violent, just like shooting him till the clip is empty. It's just repeatedly shooting him.
Yeah, Lloyd shoots him a lot.
Yeah.
One thing is I was picking up on it, maybe I'm wrong, but I felt like maybe Glenn was also, he like saw the writing on the wall, and he knew that their death was going to be probably a torture, like they were probably gonna be tortured to death. Mm-hmm. And it felt like he was angling for a faster death, maybe. Like he had to know that this, and I think he was also kind of testing him to see like, can I make this guy explode on me? And if so, like, I guess that would mean he's fallible.
I mean, I think so. Yeah. How much scarier is it if Randall Flagg does remain the cool, collected, all-knowing, calculating?
He would have won, right?
Yeah,
most likely. But instead, his anger gets the better of him.
I think that Glenn got one of the violent and gruesome, but one of the best death scenes in terms of like what it represented and the way he went up face to face with Randall Flagg.
Yeah. So let's talk about Trashcan Man, because that's our next key in what happens, what goes down. So, due to his savant talent regarding destructive devices, the Trashcan Man is assigned to search for weapons in the desert and assist in arming the fighter aircraft at Indian Springs Air Force Base. The Trashcan Man performs his duties with proficiency until, while being teased by his fellow workers, a comment causes him to experience a flashback regarding his tormented youth. The Trashcan Man undergoes a schizophrenic episode and reverts to his old destructive ways, destroying several trucks and aircraft while killing the most experienced pilots in Las Vegas. He flees into the desert, overcome with anguish over his actions. At first, he plans to kill himself, but later he seeks redemption by bringing Flagg the most powerful weapon he can find, an atomic bomb in the form of a nuclear warhead that has been detached from a missile. The Trashcan Man transports the warhead across the desert in a trailer attached to an all-terrain vehicle, contracting a lethal case of radiation poisoning in the process. The sickness has reached its terminal stage when the Trashcan Man arrives in Las Vegas. The Trashcan Man ultimately causes Flagg's apparent destruction as the hand of God descends from the sky and activates the warhead, destroying Las Vegas and every one of its inhabitants. Okay. So this is the big boom. You also have Larry and Ralph, who have been chained together, and they're going to be ordered to be like pulled apart to death. You know, it's going to be some really horrific medieval shit that Randall's doing. And interestingly, all the people in Las Vegas are like, I don't know about this. This seems like disturbing, which is very different again from the Las Vegas people that I feel like we're going to see in the show. But what was your take on this final showdown moment?
So many things to talk about. So Trashcan Man is a character that I couldn't figure out why he was in the story until the last moment. You know what I mean? Like, we kept getting the perspective. We kept getting all these different scenes, things that he was dealing with. At the beginning of this novel, if you'd given me sort of like a background ancillary summary, and you're like, this is kind of what the story's about, you know, a plague basically wipes everybody out. There's no possible way that I'm going to say like, oh yeah, like a pyromaniac brings a nuclear bomb to Vegas and then it goes off. And of course, that's how this story would end, because it's so off the wall and crazy. We keep getting his perspective, and he eventually gets the warhead, and we're like, of course, you know, that's like the largest Chekhov smoking gun I've ever seen in my life in a novel. Because you're like, okay, so he has a nuclear, you know, a nuke is now in play. You know what I mean? Like once he's found it, and then going to the end. Randall Flagg's using abilities. He's like shooting lightning from his finger and stuff. He shoots
a lightning fireball thing that like slowly melts some guy's face and like it goes up his whole, like burns out his eyes, and then it flies up into the sky and turns into like a giant fireball, electric ball thing.
Yeah, which is like I was kind of wondering. He didn't mean to do that. So that ball went into the sky, and then that's the whole hand of God situation. Which
it kind of got turned into that. I don't know. Yeah, it doesn't seem.
But like this is, we talked about before, biblical things in this story, and if any story is gonna have like a Deus Ex Machina, like a hand of God literally coming down and exploding a nuke in Vegas, like he's set it up. He's done the legwork to be like, it's a biblical, like there is clearly things that are not explainable.
Yeah. I mean, the force behind Mother Abigail is God, right? Like basically. So like you can't be angry when God plays a role, I guess. You know, at least
God's a character.
I mean, basically. So one thing I thought about with Trashcan is that he kind of is the Gollum of this story, right?
Yeah, totally. I did not think about that either. Yeah, and the nuke is the ring, right?
Maybe. I mean, we've talked about in our Lord of the Rings coverage how it might represent that, but you know, I thought it was interesting that he's. I mean, obviously, it's not a 1-to-1. No characters are 1-to-1 here, but he is this like, you know, semi-evil, sometimes sometimes good, maybe not good, but like working against the bad, and then he ends up being, a key figure in the downfall of the Dark Lord. Even though he, is not a character you would consider a good guy by any stretch. I think it's also interesting that it's like one of the dangers and one of the like many drawbacks of this style of like authoritarian strongman governance. And it's kind of just like the biggest bully wins kind of mentality, is that the bullied who are, often fall in line, they are damaged and they are traumatized, and they carry that with them, and those people can become dangerous in their own way, and you could create a dangerous situation where someone will explode on you, obviously pun intended here, I guess. But Trash Can is that too, right? Like he's everything's great until all of a sudden, the teasing triggers him and reminds him of bullies, from the past, and then he's off the deep end,
Yeah, I mean, these characters, they really have nothing to lose, right? Like if you're a character like Randall Flagg, you're building up all of this. You have so many things to lose, and these underdogs are coming at you. At some point, like somebody's going to strike a blow, and like typically things tend to topple when they do. So yeah, I agree. Like
I mean, I guess the idea is he couldn't see Trash Can because of his like altered mind or whatever you want to call it, different kind of intelligence. Same reason he couldn't see Tom Cullen. But it is interesting that much like Sauron, right? Like his eye can see so much, but it can't see certain things, or it's distracted.
Right.
Maybe it's distracted by, it's not necessarily said that Larry and Ralph like completely distract him in this moment, but maybe that's why he doesn't realize that Trash Can Man is coming up on him with this bomb until it's too late.
Just one of the wildest endings I could have possibly imagined. I just it's so wild, and I wonder what they're gonna do in the show.
So one thing that's interesting too is Larry. He's like full believer by the end. Him and Ralph both, right? They're like chanting "I'll fear no evil" over and over again. Yeah. They've basically turned into like prophets of the Lord.
I mean, they've traveled, and literally like that quote, they've traveled through the valley of death.
Yeah.
Like all of that's wrapped up in that verse.
I personally find this a little bit less interesting than what I was kind of hoping for with Larry. But in the sense that he goes from being completely selfish to like, doing the most selfless sacrifice, it works. I think it works thematically. I think it works for the character. It just, I don't know. I wanted to see, I guess someone completely giving themselves over to a higher power is always going to be less interesting to me than finding a way to not be selfish in like a more mortal realm sort of situation, right? Like your day-to-day
finding self-enlightenment kind of thing. Like they're finding it from within.
But again, I realize that's highly subjective. That's just me and my relationship to religion, probably.
Yeah.
Other people probably love that as like, the perfect ending for him.
I will say, regardless of the religious stuff, I still think like Larry's character, like you said, at the end, he's not making a sacrifice on purpose.
Yeah,
they are going on the mission on purpose, which is.
But he does have faith that it's going to work out for them, though.
Yeah, that's true.
Like he never really doubts that.
But he doesn't. My thing is like he doesn't. It's not like he made like a Glenn. Glenn like was like actively involved in his own sacrifice. Where I feel like Larry was in the situation, and then a lot of things cascaded, and he died a hero because he went on the mission. Not because of like his last acts.
Yeah,
I did think it was wild that they were like, "Oh fuck!" Like one of their last lines is like, "Oh fuck," and like because it's like, of course that's what everybody's last lines probably are.
Yeah. So when the ball of electricity hits with the nuke and then like blinding flash of light, there is like a moment where King describes like this enormous hunched figure with like yellow cat eyes. That is like there for a moment before it like zips away. It's actually before the explosion, right? Like right before the explosion.
Yeah.
And then it just leaves like clothes on the ground, I think, and some boots.
Yeah. Which felt like very anticlimactic to me. Like that was like he clearly wasn't defeated in this story.
Yeah.
And like we get that at the end as well, obviously.
Yeah. But I mean, definitely it's a defeat, but it's not a permanent one, right? Like it's because this being again is sort of eternal. There's a lot of these like eternal powers that like you can defeat them for a time, but they can always come back. Yeah. I also thought it was really interesting when we're in Flagg's point of view, where he talks about how there could be one or two others like him in other parts of the world, and he like realizes he might have to deal with that one day. So he's not necessarily unique, which I thought was fascinating.
They've been around forever, if there are multiple, but specifically he had been around forever, but he's clearly like what we get at the end. There's like a reincarnation thing that's happening. So he has to like start from the ground up. And it is just interesting that it seems like at every catastrophe, maybe that's the peak of his existence and then he has to repeat it. and create tragedy or create these moments again. I was just surprised that he didn't like have a moment of like utter defeat. It just felt like he zipped away, like you said. It was like a defeat at the hands of people not believing in him because like the jig was
it's
up.
like an It Lives moment, and it's like that kind of ending where it's like the monster persists, despite what people know.
Yeah, which we've gotten in a lot of King stories. Like we know at the end of
one of the many ways you can end a horror book.
Yeah, at the end of The Shining, I remember there's like a creature that leaves and flies up into the air. There's like, Pennywise is clearly not. Well, it seems like fully
we were talking about it a little bit before we started recording, but like, this is probably Cosmere stuff, right? Like, this is probably like greater King interconnected storytelling stuff. And we don't know because we haven't read Dark Tower, so we haven't seen. I think that's supposed to be the most like inner workings of the Cosmere and really kind of lays it all out. So I for one am like, I feel like I might finally be ready to read a Dark Tower book in the way that I didn't feel like I was before.
I feel the same way. I mean, we've read so many King books at this point. Like not nearly
which
close
is funny because we've
them.
only read like a tiny fraction of the number of King books there are.
But we've read a lot of the major ones that I feel like you need to have read to go into this. And I feel like you said to read the Dark Tower before now, I think we could appreciate some of the references and be like, oh yeah, like I kind of know that that's a thing. But now going in, like I am very excited to at some point dive into that and I was doing some research. I was looking at stuff earlier once I finished the book, and they turned this into a Marvel comic, which the Stand Marvel comic, like I want to check that out. That sounds awesome. Like this.
Oh yeah, I've seen some screen caps of that. Really
I would love like that. This is a super cinematic story that's just like begging to be like turned into a comic like it is, and I want to dig into that. And then that led me into the Dark Tower is the same thing. The Dark Tower also has Marvel comic runs, and then it just like you said, I think I'm ready.
I didn't know they were Marvel. That's cool.
Yeah. I'm very ready to get into the larger King universe, and I want some answers. At this point, I've enjoyed each individual story as a standalone story, but I think at this point he's hinted at it enough. And something I also didn't realize is he started writing the Dark Tower in like the early 80s, and I thought that this was like a 2000s thing. I thought that he was like later in his career.
Yeah, no, he's been doing it for decades. I mean, this is stuff he's been setting up since very early in his career and threading into everything he does. And I don't know, it's really fascinating because I was thinking today about how he is really good at these standalone novels. Like, there's not a lot of writers who are creating these massive standalone novels. So you're like, Carrie, The Shining, It, and it's like this one book. And like, The Stand, we divided it into 3, and within the book itself is divided into 3. And I feel like, I was like, why didn't he sell this as 3 books? It could have worked as a trilogy and all this stuff. But there's something to be said for like having that one tome and be like, no, it's The Stand. It's one book. And I don't know, it's kind of cool. And like, props to him for doing it. But he also uses his Cosmere stuff to like, his Macroverse stuff to like tie it all together, much like some grand work of epic fantasy. I don't know, it's just neat how he kind of has both. He has it both ways.
Yeah. And I was talking to you before the episode about Dark Tower stuff and how I'm very fascinated to read a King fantasy. I don't know, kind of sci-fi. I don't really know.
It's
but fantasy story.
It's fantasy. Yeah, I think it's like a dark fantasy, horror. Fantasy.
I'm excited to read a fantasy Stephen King fantasy that's not seated in like a horror story. Yeah. It's not, and I'm sure there will be horror elements. But what I mean is that like, it'll be a full-on fantasy if we're jumping multiverse things and god crazy like Lovecraftian god things.
And I was telling you that was one of the books that like I had started right before we started the podcast. I think it was one of the very last books I had started reading, and then I haven't picked it back up again because I kind of got into the mode of, well, we might cover that one day, so I better not read it now.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's still the truth or not, but I remember hearing them talking about making a Dark Tower television series. So I've also been kind of waiting because I've definitely heard like lackluster things about the Dark Tower film that came out a little while ago.
Yeah. We do have like 1 or 2 more King stories that we can jump into before the Dark Tower if we wanted to sort of wait.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of more Stephen King. Misery. I know we want to do Misery. Salem's Lot. Anyway, let me read you this final bit of Flagg's summary, and we can talk about this. At the end of the novel, the quote, hand of Hand of
The
dog.
hand of dog.
The hand of the hand of Kojack. At the end of maybe it's a big paw, a big fucking god paw comes down, and Kojack's like, "Fuck you."
I've always been really, I mean, like, genuinely, like, growing up religious, I always thought it was so interesting. This is like a child's thoughts too, so you have to bear with me. But like, dog and God being like the inverse of each other, like, there's something there,
That
right?
means
Like, dogs
something.
are very associated
Yeah,
with
man,
God.
I'm with you. Okay, so at the end of the novel, the Hand of God detonates a nuclear bomb, destroying Flagg's gathered followers as well as Las Vegas. The revised, expanded edition of the novel includes an epilogue in which Flagg, in a new incarnation, awakens in an unknown tropical location where he meets a primitive tribe. Flagg then attempts to convince the tribe's members that he has arrived to teach them the ways of civilization, identifying himself as Russell Faraday. He also earlier said his name was Richard. So yeah, I don't know these RF things. I don't know what that means. Maybe we'd learn more in the other books. But like, yeah, what did you think of this final scene here? Like, what does it all mean?
Yeah, I said it felt anticlimactic with the stuff at the end where you just sort of zipped away. But this was the thing that made it okay. This was the thing that made it feel rounded.
It's interesting that it wasn't
full.
in the original version, right? Like, this is in the expanded edition.
Oh, really? This wasn't in the original?
Yeah, this wasn't in the 1978 version. This was in the 1990 version that we read, that the expanded materials.
It feels very like bookmarking and like very like completing the circle of the story, and like I enjoyed it for what it was. And this, it's the It Lives ending, like you're talking about, like, oh, it could happen again one day. That's what
this kind of helped me also further solidify how I think of Randall Flagg as a thematic entity in this story. Because when you come up with a villain like this, as a writer, I think you're going to have to go like, what does this thing represent? What like pieces of humanity or pieces of the universe are sort of bound up and represented here? And at the end, I think there's a huge bit of colonialism going on, right? Like, I am here to bring you civilization. I am a white man, and I am going to show you the way of war and technology. And so he really does represent like man's overreach, the whole book is about a man-made disease that kills everybody, right? Like, so in that sense, the whole book is about that. It's about mankind's overreach and arrogance. And Flagg really is like the embodiment of arrogance. And what is one of the arrogant ass things that's happened throughout history? People being colonized, right? Like, I know better than you. I am here to bring you religion or bring you my way of life. And I do think it is important to note that Randall Flagg is a white dude, because, we're one of the worst perpetrators of that.
Yeah, it definitely brought that all the way around. It was interesting to see also from the perspective of he doesn't remember anything, and the way that someone who doesn't remember anything but is an entity is like this godlike, like, Lovecraftian creature or whatever. How even not knowing anything and not knowing who they are or anything, their like instinct, like their animal instinct, is to just like continue where they left off. Like, okay, now let me just build up from the ground up again, taking the influence from these people and like starting over. It's, I don't know.
It does seem to me like these beings, if I'm going to say that Randall Flagg is similar to Pennywise, which I think he kind of is, it seems like it's hinting that they bind at some point to like a person, like an actual human being, and sort of integrate into them. Because we also get some of this stuff with Pennywise, right? Where he like references having like something gray was his name in the past, right? And like there's like some references to him being like a person. And
the craziest part about Pennywise too, just to go back to that, is didn't Pennywise like come to Earth on a meteor?
Yeah,
and, like,
he did.
Like,
so he's like he's both, right? Like it feels like there's this ancient entity, but it at some point sort of fuses with a human being, is my guess. And that's what I think is going on with Randall Flagg too, because these ancient beings have all this power, yet I think their humanity in many ways grounds them to the world, and when they lose that, they tend to like lose their power or lose their grip on things.
And something else about that you just kind of clicked in my mind is like, they're these crazy creatures, Eternals, whatever they are, and they have sort of small scale goals in the grand scheme of things. Like they're like, let me terrorize people and like feed.
They just want to be worshipped. They want to be feared. They want to feed, right?
Like small in the grand scheme of things, like small, not to the humans that are having to deal with it, but small in like the universe's sense. So yeah, it is interesting that like they do bind to like a specific thing and then just stick to that instead of like being like, let me just take over the world and then move to the next planet and like or jump multiverses. I don't really know. Yeah, I feel like there's got to be some sort of motivating power beyond these like core, like they're almost like the seven deadly sins. I don't know, that's like an example that I would draw as like, if Pennywise represents like, but not the sins, I guess they're representing like emotions or something, fear and arrogance.
I don't know, man. Like I assume there are answers in the Dark Tower, so maybe one day we'll get them. Let's talk a little bit about Tom Cullen. Tom Cullen travels west, transmitting a hypnotically imprinted cover story to gain entrance into Las Vegas, and is able to avoid detection by Flagg. Cullen's anonymity seems to stem from his disability, as Flagg tells Juergens that every time he tries to see the third spy, all he sees is the moon. This confirms Juergens' sighting of Cullen earlier, while both were on Las Vegas work crews. It is Juergens' desire to protect both Cullen and his status as a spy that compels her to commit suicide, rather than submit to further questioning from Flagg. The sight of the full moon rising over Las Vegas triggers Cullen's post-hypnotic suggestion, and he begins the return trip to Boulder, appropriately noting Moon, that spells moon. During his return trip to Boulder, Cullen encounters Redman, who has suffered from a broken leg and, due to exposure, pneumonia as well. Originally, Cullen was far east of where Redman fell, but a prophetic dream tells him that he must double back to find Redman. With help from Andros' spirit, who appears to Cullen in visions, Cullen is able to nurse a delirious and dying Redman back to health, while they are snowed in for much of the winter in motels in central Utah and western Colorado. Together, the pair return to Boulder to report the destruction of Las Vegas. Okay, so Tom Cullen, who, by the way, I was going to say, if anybody is, I think, the Samwise of this book, it might be him. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that for sure. A lot more goes on with Tom than I kind of expected. I thought Tom would mosey on back on his own over time.
Well, his story like provides purpose to the whole spy plot line, right? Because otherwise it's kind of pointless.
Because everybody just dies, yeah.
Everybody just dies.
Dana dies protecting him.
What do they learn? Nothing.
Yeah, Dana dies protecting him, which, noble cause to die for, and it was, she big sacrifice. And but yeah, for him to one of the most affecting parts of the book is when Nick shows up in his dreams for the first time. Yeah. And I was like, of course Nick had to come back in some way. I didn't know we were gonna Obi-Wan Kenobi Nick Andros, but he's
way more powerful than you ever imagined.
You can possibly imagine. So he comes back, and I loved it. And Tom kind of got the inkling that he was dead because he kept turning away from him in his dreams, and it was just sad, but affecting, and made me love Tom as a character more.
Yeah.
Because that relationship is one of my favorite parts for sure.
And he comes back and saves Stu, right?
Yeah.
Which, again, like Stu's fall ends up saving him, but then he's also saved by Kojack and Tom Cullen. And
so is Kojack like the Eagles then?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It's just really sweet. And then at some point, Tom has like a vision of an elephant, or he reports having seen an elephant, was all he saw in his dream or something. And I was wondering if that is like, we got a lot of references to a turtle in it. Is this the version of that where we're getting maybe an elephant reference? Maybe there's an elephant god or elephant being.
I'm into it.
I'm sure there are answers to all these questions, but I don't know.
I'm so excited to eventually have these answers, and it's just this like long, I don't know, this long journey we've been on through Stephen King stuff, and I think even if they don't live up to the expectations that I've set for them at this point, like it'll be fun to know like all of the inside information.
Yeah, we got to read some like really bad Stephen King too, because I know there are books that people say are just awful. Yeah. I'm just like, this guy is so productive. He's written so many books over the years and so many different parts of his life and states of mind. I'm just be fascinated, but it's a weird thing to want to read a bad book, but I kind of do want to read a bad Stephen King
I mean,
book.
I've heard that Maximum Overdrive is like the main crux of the Dark Tower universe.
That's a really bad movie for sure. Oh.
Right. But what it all comes down to is like at the end of all of it is this coked up, white guy from Maine, and he's just fucking. He's like, yeah.
I mean, ultimately, he is the final boss, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, one last character we got to talk about. And do you want to talk more about Tom Cullen? Do we give him the proper? I thought it was interesting that they get snowed in Colorado of all places, right? Was that a Shining reference?
For sure.
Oh, and I thought there was a part I thought of you where Stu wants to give Tom Cullen sort of a gift, and they end up watching movies.
Yeah.
And he watches them on a projector rather than on like a VCR, and he talks about how he's like, oh, I could have done that, but there's just something about like being in a movie
Film
theater,
yeah,
and watching it, that way. And I was like, there is something about that. Man, I missed that in my pandemic life.
I mean, there's a reason why going to see like a 70 millimeter print of a movie is still like, it's so, I don't know, it's very tactile. It just feels like what movies were made to be seen on. Like it's on film. It's
you
very
can tell
classic.
that like King is a fan of movies too, right? Like, you know what I was saying? Like, he's such a pop culture fan,
Yeah.
And that comes across in this too. And then, referencing his own book with The Shining and the fact they get on a snow crawler. And I don't know, there was just a lot of, parts there. It did kind of go on a long time, which I've seen some criticism of like, why are we spending so much time? It definitely did. But you know what it also kind of reminded me of? The extended ending of Lord of the Rings, where there's all this extra shit that goes on that after the fact. So I don't know if he was leaning into that or not. But speaking of that, we're remiss to not talk about Frannie and how she kind of doesn't do anything else for the rest of the book. So let's talk about Fran.
Wait, so is she like the Éowyn Galadriel, female Tolkien character stand-in? Because like there's not a lot that goes on.
I mean,
with those
basically, right? Like she gets relegated to baby duty, essentially. So Goldsmith is opposed to Redman traveling west, but comes to terms with the journey when she realizes that Redman is compelled to follow through with the trip. Goldsmith later takes up residence with Lucy Swan and delivers a baby boy. Although initial joy is expected due to the birth, Goldsmith's child falls ill with the superflu, and she is devastated. However, she is rewarded by news of both Redman's return to the Free Zone and her baby's recovery. Throughout the novel, Goldsmith becomes more and more homesick for her native Maine, and by the end of the book, she, Redman, and baby return to Ogunquit. The last chapter also confirms that Goldsmith has become pregnant with her second child, with Redman as the father.
Yeah.
So, Frannie, I was kind of disappointed. Like, she was such a interesting character to, like, totally sideline for the third act of this book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, a lot of work was done to build up that character, and I think there was a lot more to what could have happened. Ultimately a baby making machine apparently, and
like I'll also say, again, this problem can be solved by having another woman character of significance. I mean, you got Dana, I guess, but like the fact that she is our only main character who's a woman puts a lot of pressure on her to do a lot of stuff, like the easy way to get around this, because you can ask like, well, she's pregnant, so should she have gone along at the end? She would have, like what would have happened with, yes, those are all fair points. But if Ralph, for example, was a woman, which the show did, you can change some of this pressure, I guess. But all of that aside, not just the fact that she's a woman, the fact that this character just kind of doesn't do anything else in the third act is just a little, I don't know, underwhelming.
Yeah, agreed. In terms of things going forward for society, we do learn that like the immunity's passed to the child, and like she's given like a half immunity to the first child that she's giving birth to.
So what did you think? Did you think that's where we were going when it was revealed that the baby had the superflu, or did you think, oh shit, this baby's gonna die?
I thought he might just one last time give you pull the rug out and just
twist the dagger.
Yeah. Because again, like unfortunately children are lost in pregnancies, and it is like a part of life, and it is sad, and like,
but this baby was so important. She carried it the whole time.
And again, to get back to the biblical stuff, there's a lot wrapped up in a pregnant,
and Randall Flagg's baby dies and hers does not. So Yeah, and Stu's having dreams of it and stuff, and you know, it seems like it is biblical in a way. Like he's gonna be the next great leader. I don't know.
My theory about everyone shining that's remaining, like that stands true for me. Because like you said, he's dreaming of things that are not associated with Abigail or with Randall Flagg. He's dreaming about what's going on in the future with like Frannie and all that. So I still
maybe
hold to that.
That's a good theory, you know. Honestly, I can't fault you there. What did you think of her going like, you know, this Boulder Free Zone's nice and all, but it's getting a little packed around here.
Yeah, right.
I'm gonna head back to Maine with my newborn.
There's been like 18 new babies in 6 months, so we got to get the hell out of here. I was like, all right.
Yeah. I do agree with King that it seems like an epically bad idea to start arming the police in the Boulder Free Zone. I also agree that it probably would happen, but I love the point where he was like, arming the police, you know, or it was a situation where like a drunk pushed a cop through like a glass window or something. And he's like, you know, now we have to arm the police. And he's like, well, that would probably end up with a dead drunk instead of an injured cop, you know, and I think that's proven to be true.
Yeah, and then the ghost of Glenn Bateman like comes to Stu, and he's thinking of all the No, I'm serious, but like he's thinking of all the sociological like ramifications of giving weapons to cops and all the things that happen.
He's learned his lessons from old Glenn Bateman. I think it also represents like that's the old shit that they keep talking about. It's like you're gonna bring the old shit back, and you're gonna start arming people again, and you know there's gonna start being wars again, and oppression and racism and all this stuff. And you know, I don't know, it's kind of an interesting thought, right? And he talks about this like resting period, how it's gonna be like a generation for humanity to sort of pause. And then it's going to come, it sounds like it's going to come back, and he thinks, you know, who knows where, because all this shit's just laying around is like an interesting bit at the end. He's like, it's just right there to be picked back up again. Yeah. And I think he's saying something thematic there too, right? Like, even if you decide to put away, you know, the harmful parts of society and in favor of, you know, the better ones, the good ones, the better angels of our nature or whatever, like that stuff is still right there. It's still like within arm's reach, and it can always be picked back up again.
Yeah, the generational gap is such an interesting one to think about too, because I was watching a documentary about Miyazaki recently, and he was talking about you know, he grew up just post World War II, just after the bombings that happened in Japan, and like what that did to rock the Japanese like societies and things, and that whole generation is so like anti-war and like because they dealt with that kind of stuff, and then like other generations come along that didn't directly deal with that stuff, and then fires, you know, these people are ready to go to war for their beliefs and stuff because they don't remember the horrors of war, and it's this like ugly cycle that society is always in, and like that, you know, this brings up that's the exact same idea. Like they even mentioned like, you know, we won't fight over all this stuff, but our grandkids one day, we'll let our grandkids worry about it because they'll be killing each other for it.
Well, and I think King's making some similar points here. Before we leave this book, we gotta sum it up, and I want to know what you think of it overall. But before we even do that, I have one little detail I gotta point out, because I couldn't believe it when I read it, and I was like, "You motherfucker, Stephen King! I can't believe you got away with this." He has Trashcan think to himself that he feels like the figment of someone else's imagination, and I was like, God damn it, Stephen King, you had a character think of the fact that he is a character created by you in the narrative.
All right, King is canon. He's canon in all of this multiverse stuff, I promise.
Oh my God. Just the idea of a character like recognizing that he is a figment of someone else's imagination is just amazing to me. I don't know. I couldn't believe he got away with it.
That's awesome.
But anyway, I had to point that one out. But yeah, I do want to know. So, I want to kind of talk about where I'm at with it too. But the Stand has been like a big title in the history of this podcast. You know, whether it's on episodes or off, we've talked about it a lot. We've known that this adaptation was coming a long way away, and I feel like it's been built up a lot. So what was your take on this book and how it compares to the other King books we've read? I don't know if you're prepared to rank them yet. Maybe we could do that on a bonus episode one day or something. Maybe like rank some King projects or King books.
Right.
But what did you think of this book overall?
Expectations were extremely high, obviously, coming in. And what I would say is like it met expectations. It surprised me, and I don't think that I ever could have predicted, because I never looked into what this book was about, really. I genuinely had no idea where it was going. Even the title, The Stand, like I had no idea. I didn't understand that. And I guess I should ask you, like, do you think it represents like the stand, like the to take a last stand, like the stand of humanity?
Several characters say something about taking their last stand a few times in this book. That was kind of surprising how many times the word stand, taking a stand gets thrown around.
Yeah.
So I think that's what it is.
Me too.
So it's the last stand of humanity.
Right. So, I had no idea what it was about. The title was weird to me. The cover was weird when I saw it on my dad's bookshelf growing up. I just had no idea. And then, so I didn't have any frame of reference. And then we read all of these other King books. We read It, and it has like been so lodged in my brain forever that I was like immediately coming into another massive epic tome of Stephen King's. I'm always going to compare it to It. I couldn't stop comparing the two, honestly. And I kept feeling like I was pitting them against each other. And I do think that The Stand is now, it's right there with It for me. Like I can't really decide whether one is better than the other because they're so very different. This is King's like Lord of the Rings sort of a sprawling story, and then the other is like a Goonies like classic horror icon, creature entity thing.
And weird as hell. It is a weird book.
The way that he tells stories is similar sometimes to me, but yeah, The Stand is right there for me now, and I'm surprised because
right there among your favorites, you would say.
Among my favorite, I would say It and The Stand now are my favorite Stephen King novels. I can't decide between the two. Really? Yeah, and I'll probably come back to it as we like try to rank them later.
So in like The Shining, Pet Sematary, stuff like that, they are kind of like a second tier, or?
Slightly below. Yeah, I would say like The Shining would probably be right after. I would have to think about it a little more.
Yeah,
to like
think about it.
Confirm
okay, we should do
sure.
it sometime. Maybe we need to cover a few more before we're ready to do this. I don't know. So for me, we talked about it before that like I would tell people this was my favorite Stephen King novel for a long time. I read it very early on. I actually don't remember if I read it before I initially read It. I think I read it back to back with It, like within a few months of each other. I just can't remember which one was first. It might have been The Stand first, honestly, because I felt like this was an approachable point for me because I'd heard enough about it and I kind of knew the premise, and people told me it was kind of a fantasy book in some ways. So I was like, okay. In many ways, it lived up to that, but the more I've read King, the more this book feels a little bit unusual for him. And in that sense, I don't know that this is my favorite King book anymore. Now, I really enjoyed this reread of it, and I kind of want to read some more King books, but I just don't expect I'll be saying it's my favorite anymore when people ask me, as much as I did really like it. I also just think I have a much better grip on what this book is now, covering it for a podcast and talking about it for as much as we have. Had a great time with it. I think the premise of a super flu, is a terrifying premise that we have all lived through now. Obviously not to the deadly level of this book, but that's going to affect the way I feel about this book. I'm sure that's something I can't escape. And if I had read this without having lived through COVID or lived during COVID, I probably would have a different reaction to it.
Yeah. Do you still put it up as one of your favorite King novels, or has it fallen?
Yeah, it's in. I think it is in the top tier. Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to think about it for an actual like ranking episode.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's number 2 either for me. Mm-hmm. I'll say that much. But I think it is. It is close. It is close.
Yeah. Something that I do want to say, like the things that these two novels do that's similar is that the stories are so sprawling. Like they do take you on journeys with these characters for such a long time, and there's something. This one even feels even larger than It in some ways, which makes it kind of feel like you don't get to be as close to the characters. And there's something about It that's like, I'm biased at this point.
It has a smaller scale in a weird way because it's like it's so deeply tied to these characters' inner lives and their childhoods, right? There's something very intimate, It's all set in the same town. Like this is a travel log. Like we got a lot of different locations.
I think the main thing about it too is that it's like it's 2 books. It's the children, it's their childhood, like mingling, interwoven with their adulthoods, which leads to the epic nature of the story.
Yeah, and honestly, the way that it interweaves in the book, which you don't get in the movie adaptation at all, at least the new one, the way those two intermingle and play off each other, and the story, each like parallel story builds at the same time. It's just such a cool idea for a book. Yeah. I do love that, as much as that book clearly has problems, which we've talked about at length in our first few episodes. So anyway, Stephen King fans, if you do want to hear us talk about more Stephen King books, we have lots of them in our coverage in the past, and we are open to covering more. We want to cover more, so feel free to suggest them to us. We're always curious to know what people are really into, what people are looking forward to. And is that going back to Misery? Is that doing something like The Green Mile, or even Shawshank Redemption, like very unusual kind of books for him.
It's going to be crazy to see like a entity creature in the Shawshank Redemption one day when we go to read it. There's going to be like
when Pennywise shows up in the book. Well, surprise.
Behind the poster on the wall.
Right. But anyway, we wanted to thank all of our patrons who have supported us. And if you wanted to become a patron yourself, we are going to be putting up a poll on Patreon to determine our first sort of quarterly patron voted project. And the only way to vote on that is to be a patron. And when you get in there, you also get bonus episodes, which we record monthly. We just recently did one on Snowpiercer, the first 3 episodes, which was a lot of fun. And I think we're probably going to do the other version of The Stand here's pretty soon, whether it's this month or next, I don't know, but we will get to it soon, and we'll be able to make some comparisons with the show. And Stephen King fans who are watching the show, make sure to stick around for next week when we close that out, because we're not quite done with The Stand yet.
Yeah, Stephen King has written a new ending for that show, so it'll be interesting to see what he changes.
I don't know that this book needs another ending, so I'm hesitant. Also, King isn't necessarily known for having, sticking the landing always. So the idea of him coming back and tacking another ending onto this, I don't know. I have my doubts, but I'm going in open-minded.
I've heard a little spoiler about the last episode that's not even out yet, and it's mostly that like the hand of God actually is Kojack's hand coming down from heaven.
It's a dog paw. The hand of dog comes.
Hand of dog comes down to save humanity, and by save I mean destroy Las Vegas.
Okay. If you like this episode, please let us know in the form of a rating and review on whatever podcast app you use, and if you're on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe and comment and let us know.
Yeah, and make sure to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of those at Ink to Film, and we have a Council of Inklings. It's a group on Facebook.
Absolutely, and we wanted to thank Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
Okay, now we can go and watch the last few episodes of The Stand in anticipation of I think the last episode comes out on Thursday when this episode comes out.
I'm worried. I'm just going to put it out there. I'm worried. I've heard and seen some disturbing things. So, I'm hopeful. Hope burns eternal. I hope that there's going to be good stuff. I'm sure there will be some good stuff in there, but
there's going to be, I think, yeah.
Yeah. I'm not looking forward to Trashcan Man, who I hear arrives next episode, and we'll see how that goes.
I just don't even know how you already I don't know. That character's
you don't know what
wild.
I've seen, but I've seen some stuff. But I don't know. Maybe not. I am going in with an open mind. Anyway, hopefully you join us for that next week, and until next time.
Thanks for listening.